So now we're going to continue with programming. We have one more little block before we get to a networking break. Joining me on stage to talk a little bit about rowing in the same direction, we'll get into what that means in a moment, is Miki King. Miki is the newly named CMO of the Washington Post. Come on up. So thanks for coming. I mentioned, so you've been CMO now for 4 months, 3 months?
About 3 months.
Yeah. And you're the first one that they've named recently. Briefly explain why the role you were elevated into and maybe why there was sort of a need for it.
Sure. Our publisher and CEO, Fred Ryan, thought it was really important for us to amplify the importance of subscriptions within our business. And so we've had marketing focused on various initiatives, so local sponsorships, as we had traditionally been, obviously, a more local brand, so working with the community, working with all of the local advertisers and retailers, and marketing had a very broad function prior to my coming on board a couple of years ago. And the more we dug into our subscriptions business, the more we understood, obviously, that this was really a growth opportunity for us. And we thought that as a company, it was really important to have this group be primarily focused not just on local sponsorships, not just on branding, not just on all of the incremental things that we were working on, but to really home in on our subscriptions business. And I guess the title, the function, and the growth of our team really was related to that. I wanted to also just mention I have here with me Shauna Plesmid, who runs digital acquisition on our team, and she started at the company very close to the time that I did, and we've continued to grow a team that really is focused entirely on subscriptions. And so we wanted to really make the point with that role that this was really at the core of our business. Mm-hmm.
So around the time that you were named, you had been CMO. You had spent about a year, maybe even more, kind of like gathering these disparate pieces that you just kind of laid out and sort of assembling them into a new structure. Mm-hmm. Can you walk me through a little bit more? You sort of started to explain that was what you did, but can you explain sort of how you did it,
Sure.
And how all the pieces kind of fit together a little bit?
Yes. When I started at the company, which will be 3 years ago in a couple of weeks, marketing was really, and you and I talked a little bit about this, marketing was really disparate in terms of we had a fairly large team of folks who were the local print marketing team. They were focused on home delivery. They had relationships, again, with retailers, with all of the organizations where we were focused on single copy sales, and there was a huge creative element to that. And then we started literally with 2 folks in digital marketing. I think, was it just? Yeah. And so we had 2 people who were focused on selling digital subscriptions. And so over time, obviously, that part of the business grew. We continued to focus on growing out the number of people who were focused on bringing in subscriptions across all of our digital platforms. And as we grew that team, we really wanted to make sure that the 2 groups were not speaking 2 different languages, because we had this print team that was doing things the way they had been doing them that made a ton of sense 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But as we started to have but as we started to have more conversations about the voice that we wanted to have to the market, we thought it was really important for us to be speaking in one language, one voice. And so we decided to integrate those 2 teams. So now there is no such thing as our print marketing team and our digital marketing team, our local marketing team and our national marketing team. We are an integrated group, and that does include a number of folks who had traditionally been working with our local partners and focused on primarily our home delivery business. But there is not a single person now on the entire team who focuses only on print subscriptions. So we have integrated that really in every way. A couple of examples of that are, for instance, the person who had been leading that team is now working directly with me on more national branding. So we don't do any branding that is specific to the DC market, and that was 90% of what we were doing initially. So now our branding is it's everything that you've seen, but we really have it's stopped, quite honestly, anything that is only focused on the local market.
A couple of things I want to dig into in there. Maybe first is just sort of like in terms of bringing the people that had this sort of more traditional print-focused role and now kind of like sucking them into this broader thing. Like we've talked about this in the past. The emphasis for you was on retraining them and sort of like giving them an ability to think about this in a different way. Because to your point, the sort of like lens that they looked through their job at was probably could at the very least could have been clean.
Yeah.
I'm not going to stretch this metaphor anymore, but
right.
how'd you retrain those people?
Right. Well, I think that a lot of what maybe folks in the room can relate to is that there had to be a cultural shift among folks who had primarily been working in the print side of the business to help them understand that the business is transitioning, and that does not necessarily mean that there is no place for those who were part of the legacy business. And so a lot of it was understanding skill sets. A lot of it was understanding. We had people who were really good at email campaigns to our print subscribers. And so obviously that wasn't much of a leap. But then we had folks who had been primarily trafficking house ads that were only running in the paper. And we do a number of house ads, obviously, that are on our site as well. So it was just a matter of having them work with folks on the digital team, having them work with folks on our analytics team, really to encourage more shared learning. We didn't really have a lot of major skill gaps where people just couldn't do the work that we had them to focus on the digital side. We let natural attrition take place in some cases. There were a couple of folks who either because of retirement or other reasons they left the company, and rather than backfill those roles specifically, we expanded the roles of other folks who were left on the team, some of which took on more digital responsibility, and others we were able to shift around.
And then the other thing I'm curious about is the idea of, you have this sort of idiom and style of speaking to the hometown readership, the people in DC. You decide instead to sort of speak with one voice, which I guess means a voice that projects not only to DC but also at a national level too. Can you explain a little bit what the sort of like rationale behind that was? And because I would think that different audience might need a different tone of voice, or like explain the rationale behind that.
Yeah. So initially our home delivery or our print local messaging was hyper local. You may or may not know that the Washington Post actually doesn't do home delivery or doesn't deliver the paper anywhere else. I don't know if you, some people just sort of assume if I'm in California I can get the Washington Post, but you actually can't. You can have us mail it to you, but you're going to get it a few days later, or obviously you can pay for UPS, but we don't have home delivery anywhere else. Our local marketing was focused on the home delivery process. So some of you might even know the tagline if you've been in DC, the Washington Post, if you don't get it, you don't get it. That is literally about physically getting the paper. So there is no getting the Washington Post outside of DC. So it just actually didn't work. And so the messaging now, it's not about, and the messaging now that we've worked hard to bring forward is the news that's happening for you is, it's happening in our backyard, but we're bringing it to you. So there still is very much this idea that Washington and the proximity that we have to Capitol Hill, to what's happening at the White House, all of that is still very relevant, and we need to be talking about that. But we're talking about why that's relevant to you, even in Silicon Valley, even in New York City.
And in terms of the messaging that you're using and the sort of style of the style that you're using to reach everybody, we've talked about this in the past. Like, this is mostly going to be focused on performance marketing, right?
Yeah.
This is not a lot of kind of top funnel.
Right.
Explain the rationale behind that.
That's absolutely true. So going back to the core of our business right now is growing our subscription base. And so while we do not, we were talking earlier about, just sort of being lean, and, we don't have 100 people whose job it is to just make great branding ads, or to be on every billboard, or to be in every out of home and on the side of every bus. That is not really what our aim is. Our goal is, how do we meet the reader where he or she is to put them on a path to subscription? And so our marketing is about exactly that. It is primarily digital. It is primarily in places where you can click and subscribe, or you can click and get to content that's going to drive you into our meter. So while all of those things might be beautiful and impressive, we think that there's a huge opportunity just in reaching the digital reader and really like, focusing on our audience in a way that gets them to the end goal, which is where we want them to be. Obviously, you could see a billboard that would lead you to subscribe, but we believe that you're much more likely to, the investments that we're making are really more about enhancing your digital experience with us in a way that would drive you to subscribe.
In terms of the balance, though, you mentioned it's going to be principally digital. Is that sort of, I mean, you guys have, I think, gotten very good at using your owned and operated as a channel, but are you, what is the kind of like off-platform?
Yeah, so the out-of-home, to use a sort of legacy term, you might have seen, this was not a subscription ad, but we did do one major ad a couple of weeks ago, you might have seen. So we did do one television spot. We are looking at television spots in a couple of key markets where with cable news outlets and so forth, so we will have some presence with the CNN and MSNBC, just to give a little bit of insight to where that might be in targeted markets. The majority will be digital and audio, but we will experiment with some television as well.
Why audio?
So we think there's a huge opportunity in, first of all, you might know that we launched a podcast recently, a new daily podcast recently, and as we've continued to learn about the growing audience in audio, we think that there could be a huge opportunity for us there. We're making investments there. We believe that audiences are coming to audio, and we want to see what that could potentially look like for us. We did a lot of audio in the radio in the local market back when we were doing a lot of local marketing. Now our thinking is more along the lines of, what does it look like if we're in Spotify, if we're in Audible, in places where we know that our target market will be, and we still think of that as part of a digital experience in many ways.
Mm-hmm. And so, okay, you've gotten everybody organized on the same page. You've set up and put in place a strategy that you're going to use to, I guess, target folks. What's the goal for this year in terms of maybe fortifying the team that you have? Like, what are you sort of how are you looking to augment it and strengthen it?
One of the things I think is really important is looking beyond our team. And so we really do have this tops-down focus from our owner to our publisher to everyone else about focusing on the importance of subscriptions as our business. And so beyond our own team, every major department and team within the Washington Post, so our engineering team, our analytics and product team, in the newsroom, has a group of people or some person dedicated to working with us. And so now we are really focused on our tentacles outside of just our team. So we spend just as much time with other departments and our liaisons on those other teams as we do with each other. And really it's about how do we increase our knowledge of what they do in a way that allows us to be able to impact the decisions that are being made in all of those places that help us to drive subscriptions. So it's less about how do we build the team, how do we get more folks on our team, but how do we build our ability, how do we continue to develop our ability to influence those other teams.
How often are you connecting with those guys? Is it like a
Oh my
weekly?
goodness, daily? I mean, right now? it is literally minute to minute. I mean, there is not a day that goes by that we are not in touch with product. There's not a day that goes by that we're not in touch with, and I kind of put product engineering analytics in the sort of same bucket, not a day that goes by that we're not in contact with news. So we are very much kind of matrixed into the rest of the organization.
Fantastic. This has been great.